which is a perfect segue into the Big Canyon conversation. So the question is, how much activity do we want in an area? Now, if I'm in Alpine Village, I'd say very little, because you all are the pioneers of this beautiful landscape, right? You got here first. And in some ways, these land use conversations really boil down to that. People want what they want because they got there first. And so I absolutely understand. I'm guessing that everybody here is opposed to that project, irrespective of what it is that the environmental reports say, right?
Yes.
Anybody want any additional housing in their neighborhood?
No.
Anybody want to see the housing crisis to go down in Los Angeles? Maybe, but not in my neighborhood.
Well, I don't think everybody's against the right kind of development. The original deal was 20-some houses.
Right.
22.
I don't think anybody here would say no.
That's and that's where
We don't want 240 houses.
right. And let me tell you that I think 242 is too big.
Too big.
So the question becomes, there's a couple of questions. Do we want something? Some people will say no. Some, I think, Paul, I appreciate your opinion, say, you know what, it depends. It really depends on how much and how soon. So what's happening right now, let me describe the process to you. So right now, the city planning department, that department accepted the package of work to review what should go there. Now, it's sort of interesting that they accepted it, because under Ms. Gruhl's watch, that same department downzoned that area. That area, I forget what the number was at some density.
5 to 1.
Well, let me see if I can tell the story first. And the numbers really don't matter yet. They will at some point. So they were at some level of density and land use designation. Then, at Ms. Gruhl's behest, they got downzoned to 20 units, which really means 40 units, because state law gives parcels that are that size the ability to put an additional house on it. And we know that's typically what will happen. There'll be lot splits and that sort of thing. So for all intents and purposes, the number is really closer to 40. So, and then it's brought out an awful lot that there's some paperwork that says that it's irrevocable, that it can never be changed. That's actually a misnomer. If you look at any sort of planning document, the language is always the same. It's always up to the decision makers and the city planning department on whether to change things, which is why it's so important for us to make sure that we have good community plans in place. We just finalized one that took 7 years. It predated my time here. Actually, it started just as I left the city of Los Angeles and finalized here, the Silmar Community Plan. And why those community plans are so important is that it gives us leverage over projects, and it gives us a perspective that hopefully will last 10, 15, 20 years. So in the case of Silmar, for example, and it's not because I'm a resident of Silmar, it's a 7-year process, and we heard from the stakeholders. The entire community was effectively downzoned a little bit because it's equestrian property. And so we've got a lot going for us in this conversation. What we don't have going for us is a recent community plan. But that's why I think the department decided to go ahead and accept the application. The acceptance of the application is effectively just a review. It's not to say that they won't say yes to something, but they're doing their due diligence. They want to figure out how much housing would be appropriate given the existing sort of landscape. That parcel is really, really difficult, right? You've got species issues, you've got some areas that aren't buildable, not because they're not desirable, but because of the topography and their basins. I mean, it's a really difficult thing. So what is happening right now is the city planning department is doing that review. They are determining what they think can happen. So as much as folks, will sort of say, well, Wendy Gruhl, this downzoning, we have to live in the here and now. The planning department accepted the application. They're doing their due diligence. We'll know soon enough what they think. At that point, I think it's really important for us to figure out what it is that we think, separate and aside from nothing, because I think that right now you can't say nothing, because you have the ability to put 40 effectively. If this developer wanted to just do what's by right, they have the ability to do something. So the question for all of us is going to be, what does that environmental report say, and what is it that we can live with? I don't know the answer. And as easy as it might be for folks to say, well, just say no to everything, that's not how I work. I mean, my job is to balance things out and be as pragmatic as possible. That is hard to do.
My previous experience has been with mitigation, and the government's enforcement then of mitigation, agreed upon mitigation of things. This development right below us, I really didn't have a large problem with it, and I'm not a sort of person, well, who says I have mine and you shouldn't have yours. Okay, actually that's has come from one of your previous colleagues, which seemed to tout the same thing. But it's when the community agrees upon something and certain types of mitigation are supposed to occur, and that's violated, and then you hear nothing back from the government or the people who are supposed to be representing you and enforcing these things. So, you speak of the topography. This whole community right here below us, this private community, this thing's built on 40 feet of fill. I won't even go into that. That's kind of a joke. So they'll be able to come up with something out there to get the homes on it and to get the low points filled in and everything else. It really, my whole contention in this matter is smart development, which say maybe getting more community members in, we can do something about that Kmart sitting out on Foothill, fallow, falling into the ground or whatever the hell is happening to it. But it really, I don't know too many people in the community here actually, but I've lived here a long time, and my big concern is, and I've been through it, is when we come up with plans and people are reasonable and it says, okay, this is how these problems are going to be mitigated. It seemed to me on this last one, once the stuff went in, and certain things weren't mitigated how they're supposed to be, the community ended up on their own. Now, I personally actually took the brunt of it with a few things and was ignored. So that's really my major concern at this point. We can have meetings and we can talk, but quite frankly, from 10, 12 years ago, and not since so it's you, but your story seems the same. The voice doesn't change.
So I hope it's a little more articulate in this body.
You plug into it,
Yeah. So I mean, look, I couldn't agree with you more. The shortcoming, I think, in a lot of these decisions is the enforceable conditions, right, and the mitigations. And so, I'm not an attorney. I'm an MBA, but not an attorney. My thing is, I want to make sure that whatever deal I'm getting into actually is going to be a lasting deal. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, let's get back to litigation. I'm involved in business. I run a very large company, and litigation is money, okay? I can tell you exactly the things I don't litigate over and isn't worth it to me. And I can sure tell you that getting some of the things enforced down there, the city wasn't going to get involved in the litigation. And of course, I wasn't going to crank my own money into litigating against the developer.
So I not only would it be irresponsible for me to comment on litigation because there isn't any pending, but at some point I'm used to getting deposed. I mean, by virtue of the decisions I make, whether it's in my district or not, I have to go and talk to attorneys all of the time because, to your point, it's a very litigious environment. So to zoom out a little bit, the mitigations and enforceable conditions I think are going to be really important. So let's say there is something that folks can live with.
I don't think it's fair to come up here and to start with the statement of nobody up here wants anything, and that that this is it kind of strikes me a little bit weird that you come in and then start up with well, you have a choice, you don't want anything down there at all, and I'm having like some sort of weird flashback to 10 or 12 years ago. It's very odd.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We should
So,
probably
so,
move
so
on.
that's where we are in the process. I forget off the top of my head when the department's going to come back with the information on their review. But at that point, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us to comment on what's been happening. Now, I know the developer has done some scoping meetings to try to figure out what it is that folks want or don't want. We're not a part of that process. That's the developer. The part that I can speak to is the official environmental review that the department is doing. And we'll know in short order what's going to happen. Now, if I had to, I said a second ago, 242 I think is too big. I think that if I were living here, the biggest challenge that I'd have is the access to this location. I mean, it's a 2-lane highway, 1 lane in each direction. That's really difficult. But at the same time, I think that to the earlier point that I mentioned is, I think the reason we have so many villages and encampments, and I'm not trying to tie one to the other, but I'm trying to just help folks understand that we need to figure out something for this area that increases activity so that we can make sure that we prevent what's happening out there, which is it's fairly comfortable. If you go back there, it's actually much cooler than it is right here because of the tree canopy. So something's going to happen there, I think, for us to make sure that we're keeping on top of the area. Paul.
Well, the development down the corner here is a good example of proper growth. It's right near the wash where they go in. 16, 18 houses there. That's going to help us. That's going to help us because you got